Human beings often need a way to escape from the mundane cycle of life. For many people who describe themselves as thrill seekers, they will spend time going to amusement parks. The UK is no stranger to amusement parks and theme parks, with the likes of Blackpool Pleasure Beach, Alton Towers and Thorpe Park being some of the most well known in the world. Similarly, the UK does also have its fair share of defunct parks with the likes of Camelot and the American Adventure. However, there is one that is seldom mentioned by park enthusiasts, one that for over 70 years was a sister park to one of the big three British parks. Let's take a journey into the tale of the UK's forgotten theme park, Frontierland. Seaside towns have always been popular holiday spots for Brits on a budget, and Morecambe was no different. This small town, north of Blackpool, would eventually be home to a park that would someday become Frontierland. The park's inception is mostly lost to time. What is known is that it was opened somewhere around the turn of the century, potentially named West End Amusement Park. However, there are links to another park that may have more in common with Frontierland than just the location. Throughout the 1920s, a park was mentioned in the local newspaper under the name of Figure 8 Park. This park also seemed to date to the 1900s, which means this park was almost definitely an early version of what would later become Frontierland. The earliest mention of Figure 8 Park was in early 1922, when the local Women's Citizens organisation used the park for a lecture. Many meetings for this organisation were held at the park, including one in April 1922 where Winifred Mayo, an active suffragette, made an appearance to talk about the suffrage movement. Around June of the same year, the park reported in the local newspaper that they had undergone immense improvements and alterations. The park had overseen renovations which included repainting to a new white and green colour scheme and adding in asphalt paths, as well as adding new illuminations. By this point, there was also the Figure 8 miniature railway, which is where the park gained its name from. Also by this point, the park had an all-day free admission as well as being regularly reported in the Morecambe Guardian. The park saw success in the 1920s, with many people coming from places like Bolton and Burnley to enjoy the park. Along with this, they also gained a few rides from Olympia Park in London, as well as more nighttime illuminations being held at the park. However, this period of prosperity and happiness would soon start to end, and the park would start to go downhill. By 1927, many guests would complain about bad smells which would come from around the park. This was later said to be part of Morecambe's lack of a first-class sewage system. More bad press came the following year when a homeless man was arrested after being drunk and wiping his greasy hands on fairground goers on Marine Road. The worst incident, however, was in 1929 when a woman was shot in her left arm at the park. The woman was taken to a hospital in Blackpool where the bullet was found to have gone right through her arm, and she narrowly survived the encounter. It seemed the bullet came from a wayward shot from the park's shooting range. What made the situation worse is that the owners of the park did not notify the police about the incident. In the same year as the shooting incident, the park was taken over by a Blackpool-based company called Hitchens Ltd. Under their ownership, the park continued to gain bad press. In 1930, 3 women working as fortune tellers in the park were found to be telling guests that they could heal serious illnesses and ailments as well as telling them their future. They were all found guilty of cheating people out of money and were each fined 10 shillings. After this, crime rates in the park started increasing. In 1933, 5 watches were stolen from a dispensing machine. That same year, a zoo arrived which led to 2 monkeys escaping and park staff having to retrieve them, providing entertainment for crowds nearby. In the following years, the park would keep declining, as well as the promenade which would be damaged by storms. It seemed inevitable for the park's closure. During a redevelopment scheme in 1938 to attempt to bring the promenade back to its former glory, Figure 8 Park was torn down, and smaller amusements, including a cinema, would replace it. However, this would not be the end for the park. The park emerged months later nearer to Marine Road West, on the land where Frontierland would later occupy. This was seen as an unpopular move due to its proximity to many homes, becoming a noisemaker and an eyesore to residents. Two major things happened in 1939, the first being the opening of Cyclone, a wooden roller coaster designed by Charles Page. This 3,000 foot long wooden roller coaster ran around the perimeter of the park and drew crowds to the newly named Morecambe Pleasure Park. The other thing to happen in 1939 was, of course, the beginning of the Second World War. This caused expansion of the park to quickly halt. This meant it took longer to complete the renovations from Figure 8 Park, as we know they weren't finished by 1948. What we do know is somewhere between 1939 and 1948 was when Leonard Thompson bought the park and added it to his two other successful parks, Blackpool Pleasure Beach and Southport Pleasureland. One of the first things Leonard Thompson invested in opened in 1949, an ice dome similar to the Hot Ice Arena at the now sister park of Blackpool Pleasure Beach. One of the first shows put on at the ice dome was an American show named Stars and Stripes. This may have been the origins to the park's retheme in the coming decades. In 1955, a fire began by a holidaymaker who carelessly threw his cigarette butt onto a ride. The blaze was roughly 40 feet tall, but luckily it seems no one was hurt. A new roller coaster opened in 1961. Runaway Mine Train was a wooden wild mouse similar to Wild Mouse at Blackpool Pleasure Beach before its extension. At a height of 40 feet and a length of 1,600 feet, it was sure to be a short but fun ride for kids and adults alike. 1962 saw the removal of the ice dome to be renovated into a bingo hall. This eventually would also be replaced by a play site named Fun City. Not much is known about the rest of the 60s, but the 1970s did introduce some flat rides that the park would have for the rest of its life. One of these was a slide named Rampage Slide manufactured by Bennett. Another was the traditional carousel, later named Western Carousel. In this time, the park also opened two dark rides. One of these was a ghost train named Scream Machine, which opened in 1978. The next year, it was renamed to Star Trekker and was given a space theme. This was due to a new ghost train opening the same year. This was manufactured by Supercar and was used as a travelling ride before arriving at Morecambe Pleasure Park. The 1980s were a decade of massive developments for Morecambe Pleasure Park. They began the decade with the opening of Big Wheel, a large Ferris wheel. This ride didn't stay around for long, however, as residents complained about the ride to the point where the park saw fit to tear it down in 1982. The same year Big Wheel was torn down, the park opened a log flume situated near Runaway Mine Train. This ride strengthened the link between it and its sister park of Blackpool Pleasure Beach, which already had a large-scale log flume as part of its lineup. It may have been small, having only one drop, but it did add a unique experience compared to other rides in the park. 1983 saw the arrival of a twister ride manufactured by the Eli Bridge Company. This was named American Scrambler and was sure to give guests at the park just that much more of a thrill. Around 1984, the park introduced another small roller coaster by the name of American Coaster. This supercar kiddie coaster would have complemented the park's other roller coasters nicely, as it was the tamest of the current coasters. Around the same time, the park's attendance seemed to be dwindling once more. At this point, Leonard Thompson's son Jeffrey was in charge of the three parks, and he decided to put a large amount of money into Morecambe Pleasure Park. By 1986, Morecambe Pleasure Park was no more. The park had been entirely rethemed to Frontierland. This did not just include buildings being repainted and facades being altered, but multiple rides also received rethemes. Star Trekker became the Haunted Silver Mine, and Cyclone became known as the Texas Tornado. The park was specifically given a Wild West theme due to the boost in popularity the style had at the time, with different movies being released themed to the Wild West, and even theme park rides being themed to it too.
Frontierland. Spectacular rides, fabulous live entertainment, and you're free to walk in.
The next investment came in 1988, with the arrival of Stampede. Like many other rides in the park, this was a relocation. In fact, this ride was relocated from Blackpool Pleasure Beach, where it too was known as Cyclone. It was relocated to make way for Avalanche, the park's Mack Rides bobsled coaster. This Pinfari Cyclone fit perfectly in the back of the park and acted as one of the largest rides in the park with its multiple fast drops. To round out the decade, the park opened their Sky Ride to take guests from the front of the park to the back. The 1990s began quietly, with no new additions. However, 1991 saw the debut of two rides, one being Percolator. This Teacups ride was relocated from the US and was located near to Stampede. The other ride was Rattler, a wacky worm coaster. While not large by any means, this did act as a stepping stone on from American coaster. Throughout the 1990s, the park's attendance began to decline once again. The park will carry on through, however, with its 1995 edition being one of the most well-known icons from the park's history. Opening in 1974 at Blackpool Pleasure Beach, Space Tower was an intimate gyro tower that would give guests a 360-degree view of the park and the sea. This ride closed in 1993 to make way for the big one. Due to this, the ride was sent to Morecambe. Originally meant to be installed in the back of the park, the ride gained a sponsorship by Polo Mints and was placed at the front of the park instead. The Space Tower would be given the name of the Polo Tower and would be painted to match, with the cabin itself themed to an individual mint. This ride didn't just have the sponsorship, however. Jeffrey Thompson signed a contract in 1993 for a telephone mast to be placed atop the tower for 20 years, meaning the tower could not be removed at least until 2013. This made those who knew hopeful that the park still had years left. Unfortunately, they were wrong. "1998 saw some of the park's last additions. These included a standard waltzer that had spent decades at Southport Pleasureland, and a Trabant ride named Satellite, also from Southport Pleasureland. The park's attendance was declining once again, and Jeffrey Thompson's relationship with Lancaster City Council was beginning to sour. Eventually, Jeffrey had enough. Within the year, the park began to downsize. The first ride to go was Stampede, closing at the end of 1998. Along with Stampede, the teacups were also removed. 1999 saw more removal of rides. This is when it was known that Frontierland would be permanently closing. Texas Tornado was closed halfway through the season and never reopened. Rampage Slide was removed too, along with the Ghost Train and the Runaway Mine Train. The park shut down for good in November of 1999, with the rest of the rides left standing but not operating. The year of the new millennium saw almost all of the other rides being removed. Temporary travelling rides were also operated on the site, but only lasted a few months. One of these is believed to be a Barbizon jamming roller coaster with a spiral lift hill and spinning seats. By the end of the year, however, the Log Flume and the Polo Tower were the only remaining rides on site. All that was left besides these was the park's entrance, which was acting as a pub. Many of the park's rides were relocated. A number of the flat rides were relocated to Southport Pleasureland. Percolator, the park's teacups, was relocated to Southport Pleasureland too, but didn't reopen. Another ride that headed to Southport was Runaway Mine Train, which was renamed King Solomon's Mines and opened in 2000. Most of these rides lasted until Southport's closure in 2006, with King Solomon's Mines being put in storage at Dreamland Margate until 2019, where it was scrapped. Ghost Train ended up at Breen Leisure Park under the name of Terror Castle, where it still operates. Rattler was relocated to Blackpool Pleasure Beach in 2004 under the name of Big Apple. This only lasted a year, however, and was later sold on in the travelling circuit. American Coaster is also in the travelling circuit under the name Wild Frontier as of February 2019. Stampede spent a few years at parks such as the Billing Aquadrome before closing at Killarney Springs in 2006 and being scrapped. The Barbizon jamming, which was installed in 2000, went on to spend a few years in the travelling circuit before it was believed to be installed at M&D's in Scotland. It is still there, with the modified lift hill and no longer featuring spinning seats, under the name of Runaway Mine Train. Unfortunately, not all rides found new homes, the main one of these being Texas Tornado itself, which was torn down with Frontierland. The site itself remained the same for many years. A few small outlet units were planned in the early 2000s but weren't built until 2007 and opened in 2008. The area these outlets took over were near the rear of the park where Stampede once stood. By 2009, the park's land was owned by Morrisons, who began to try to clear up the site. They removed the cabin from the Polo Tower as well as removed almost all of the log flume, only leaving the trough from the final drop as well as the station of the ride in place. The site once again remained in limbo until 2016 when the Ranch House Bar, the former Frontierland entrance, closed. Around this point, Morrisons was in the planning stages of redeveloping the Frontierland site into a larger retail park. Another major thing to happen in 2016 was a large fire that took place within the closed Ranch House Bar, leaving the building in ruins. The remains of the building were demolished, leaving the Polo Tower as the last standing structure on site. This was not for long, however, as in 2017, demolition began on the Polo Tower. By the end of the year, the ride was fully scrapped. Around this time, the plans for the retail park fell through, and nothing changed at the site for a few more years. The next development for the site occurred in 2021, when the land was bought by Lancaster City Council, who immediately tried to find ways to fill in the land. This happened around the same time as plans for Eden Project Morecambe were announced for the land opposite Frontierland. In 2023, every remaining remnant of Frontierland was removed, including what was left of the log flume, and the whole site was cleaned up. The construction wall blocking the site off was also adorned with many pieces of art in an attempt to make the area look more appealing, as well as to show off more local artists' work. Since then, a board has been made to help decide what should be done with Frontierland, with the majority hoping for a new leisure attraction to be built on the site. There have also been multiple talks for the land to be taken up by a hotel, depending on the success of Eden Project Morecambe. As of 2024, the land still remains empty with no long-term plan in place. For almost a century, Frontierland acted as a beloved day trip of fun and thrills for countless families. Now, 25 years later, those memories are only represented by a flat plot of land, scarred by remnants of the past. The world hasn't been kind to Frontierland, and Morecambe as a whole. However, with the Eden project and the boost in the local economy it will bring, the future of the small field facing the ocean seems bright, and will be used for good once again. If there will be any nods to Frontierland in its future replacement remains to be seen. Either way, guests who visited as children will remember Frontierland for the fun memories it created, rather than the eyesore it became. Frontierland will live on in the fans of the park, and the children who called it their world of excitement. Frontierland is gone, but the memories remain. So maybe we shouldn't call it the UK's forgotten park after all. Maybe we just had to be there.